Gnaeus Pompey the Great was a political and military figure of ancient Rome, who participated in a huge number of wars and intrigues, and at the end of his life challenged Caesar himself. A man who was among the trio of the most influential people of the Eternal City, and thus the world. A man slaughtered like a lousy dog. Besides, this is another candidate for the club, and who is that? In the minds of our contemporaries, since many have heard of Pompey as the winner of Spartacus and as a city that buried under it ashes from Vesuvius. Let's try to organize the information in our heads to understand and realize the significance of the character. A son was born to Gnaeus Pompeius Strabo. According to family tradition, the child was named Gnaeus. He was the fourth with this name in the family for the last 4 generations. He began to work actively under the father of the consul. Successfully fighting in the allied wars against rebellious tribes, Gnaeus quickly won the love of the soldiers. But the Pope was mortal like everyone else. Jupiter summoned an outstanding man to his side, sending a direct invitation to heaven in the form of a lightning bolt, literally, to the worthy husband's head. After the stretcher was overturned by the crowd at the funeral and all manner of impropriety was performed over the deceased's body, the son realized trouble had begun and took up a circular defense at the estate. No harm done. Successfully acquitted in court on charges of concealing war booty, Pompey was able to exhale and look around. For the wreath of the ruler of Rome in those times of civil wars fought 2 Lucius Cornelius, Cinna and Sulla. Our hero joined the first. He was happy to accept a man very popular with the soldiers. Therefore, Gnaeus was welcomed with open arms, hiding daggers under togas. But sensing trouble, the young man disappears from the camp. The soldiers revolt, thinking he's been killed. Cinna excused himself as best he could, but not convincingly. A dagger under the rib sent the consul to perfect his oratory in Hades. And what of Pompey? He, meanwhile, was holed up in a villa in his native Pitsina. After waiting for a while, Gnaeus again got involved in politics. But this time he decided to play it big and specific. Recruiting among the veterans of his father's legion, and after some time 2 more, the young warrior defeated the army of Sulla's opponents, took several cities and joined Sulla. Lucius Cornelius was overjoyed to have such an ally. So much so that Gnaeus Pompey at the age of 23 receives the title of emperor. Then it meant a victorious commander. After the young descendant of Strabo successfully fought in Sicily and Africa, Sulla worried and ordered the disbandment of troops. However, direct hints legions that Lucius Cornelius, and for less already sent to heaven, forced Sulla to cancel his order. The dictator named Pompey the Great and granted him the right to triumph. At such a young age. Having survived the trial by fire, the young triumphator could not cope with the glory and sassed the dictator, tried to ride into Rome on a quadruped of elephants and generally got proud. When Sulla died, Pompey went to war. This time the Iberian Peninsula was chosen as the field to consolidate his talent. Here it turned out that pride is a bad help in combat. A talented opponent of the Romans, Sertorius, beat the emperor as he wanted. 2 major defeats and the end of the expedition was nigh. But where the legion fails, other circumstances will help. Sertorius was slaughtered by his own men. Perpernum, who replaced the genius, was weak against Pompey. He returned to Rome as a conqueror and began spreading rumors of how he'd divinely dispersed everyone in the West. The citizens believed it. Arriving in Italy with victory, again with triumph, our hero managed to take a lot of laurels from Crassus, who almost crushed the rebellion of Spartacus. Gnaeus defeated the last large group of slaves he encountered in the Alps on his way home. This gave him the opportunity to claim everywhere that he was involved in saving the Roman state. Our hero had the nerve to declare to the Senate that Crassus had defeated the slaves, and he had destroyed the war at its root. Crassus did not like this. After staying in the Eternal City for a few years, Pompey repealed the laws of Sulla and returned power to the tribunes and just rested. Satisfied with his contribution to the state structure, Gnaeus went to deal with pirates, very stressful all over the Mediterranean. Here everything went as it should. Pompey for 3 months almost strangled criminal trade. The decisive battle took place at Caraction, now Antalya. Then there were the long 4 years that Gnaeus spent in the east. War in Armenia, Pontus, Syria, Judea, the Caucasus, and many others. Rome's possessions had expanded so greatly that Pompey was granted the third triumph of his life. And not surprisingly, if we believe Plutarch, thanks to these conquests, the amount of revenues to the treasury more than doubled. In addition to the huge wealth Pompey found and popularity, which promised problems to the Senate, but here Gnaeus himself did everything right. The troops were disbanded on the border and Rome exhaled. The dictator did not happen. The next dozen years passed under the sign of the triumvirate Crassus. Pompey and Caesar agreed on how to exist in Rome without killing each other. The great men divided their spheres of influence and tried to honor the agreement. When Publius Licinius Crassus died in the war with Parthia, it became obvious that political equilibrium would be found only after another triumvir followed in the footsteps of the deceased. The confrontation of the following years I will not describe. It ended with the Battle of Pharsalus. Caesar won. In principle, already at Pharsalus could end and the story of Gnaeus the Great, but he was able to avoid capture and left Greece on a random ship. Passing through Cyprus, Pompey has appeared in Egypt, apparently counting on the help of the Egyptian Tsar Ptolemy Dionysius. Ptolemy was at war with Cleopatra. Not himself, of course, the king was a child. The chamberlain Pothinus, the rhetorician Theodotus, and the general Achilles fought and ruled. These three decided it was more important to please the victor Caesar than to help the loser. To the ship on which Gnaeus with his wife and son arrived in Egypt, approached the boat. In the ship was Achilles, Septimius, former military tribune at Pompey, Centurion Salvius, and a few servants. The triumvir was invited to get into the boat. Several triremes appeared nearby, gently hinted with their presence that it was too late to escape. Pompey entered the boat. The ship was at a considerable distance from the shore, and since none of his companions had said a single friendly word to him, Pompey looked at Septimius and said, "If I am not mistaken, I recognize my old comrade in arms." He nodded his head in agreement, but made no reply, nor did he show any friendly disposition. Then followed a long silence, during which Pompey read a small scroll with a speech to Ptolemy written by him in Greek. When Pompey began to approach the shore, Cornelia and her friends watched from the ship in great excitement at what would happen, and began to gather their spirits, seeing that to the place of landing flocked a lot of courtiers, as if for an honorable meeting. But at the moment when Pompey leaned on Philip's arm, so that it would be easier to rise, Septimius from behind pierced him with a sword, and then pulled out their swords Salvius and Achilles. Pompey pulled the toga over his face with both hands, without saying or doing anything inconsistent with his dignity. He only let out a groan and bravely took the blows. Pompey's head was cut off and his body was thrown on the shore. His body was then betrayed to the funeral pyre by Pompey's scapegoat Philip. A little later, Caesar came to Egypt. He brought Pompey's head. The ruler of Rome did not appreciate the gesture. Achilles and Pothinus were executed. Theodotus was able to escape, but a few years later was captured and executed by Marcus Brutus.